I'm here with a review of Son of a Trickster by Eden Robinson. And for this review, I'm going to be doing it in two parts. So the first half of this video is going to be a traditional review, and the second half of this review is going to be a review of the book in the context of Canada Reads 2020. So let's get right into it. This book was written by Eden Robinson, and it will be defended by Ganyadillo Horn. So in this book we follow Jared, who's a 16-year-old Métis kid who doesn't have the greatest of family dynamics. His father left when he was young, his mother is an addict, and he carries on some of these traits in himself. He also wants to take care of everyone around him, but he's also into drinking and doing drugs. But there's also maybe more going on in his life than he realizes. So for me, there's three important things I look for in a good book, and that is good writing, good character development, and interesting themes. So let's talk about those things. In regards to the writing, the pacing made this very readable. I found that I was reading at a really steady pace even when the action wasn't there. The writing was okay, although she did tend to use text speak, where, for example, you type out the letter U instead of typing out Y-O-U. And she referenced things such as iPods. I found that this was jarring me a bit because even though this book was only written a few years ago, those things are already outdated. So I think just the references to fads and like technological things for me should be avoided in writing. In regards to characters, I loved Jared and the tender moments of him taking care of the people around him. I did struggle with how mature he seemed at first, especially in regards to how much drinking and drugs he was doing. And that was until I realized not only his situation, you know, his mother is a drug dealer and he's dealing with intergenerational trauma and his father left him, but also I read about Jesse Thistle autobiography doing similar things when he was that age. So initially I felt like the character was too mature, but he actually is like that. I also loved the character of Sarah. She seemed kind of ripped from the pages of Tumblr, with all the good and bad of that rolled together. I also initially liked the character of the paternal grandmother, until she made a choice that seemed really odd for someone who once seemed so compassionate. In regards to the themes, there's two that I'd like to talk about. First is family, which is an interesting theme, but what I didn't like is the emphasis on blood family, especially when that family treats you horribly. Found families, I think, are very super important, and I feel like the character of Sarah should have been the voice of that, but the emphasis was on blood family and sticking together despite toxic relationships. Another theme that's addressed is addiction, and this is an issue that plagues First Nations people, and we see how it begins in Jared as a young teenager and then how it affects your life as you get older in the character of his mother. So we see different dynamics with addiction there. One of the standout features of this book was actually the compassion shown by Jared. He cared for everyone around him regardless of how horrible they were to him. And he was so mature also in how he forgave those who wronged him, and knew when to stand up for himself without hurting others. And I think aside from the drug and alcohol use, he would be a great role model for teenagers in that way. One of the negative features of this book, however, is that this is the first in a trilogy. And the last quarter of the book was definitely from out of left field, and it felt like an introduction to a larger book as opposed to a standalone here. The last quarter felt kind of disconnected from the first bit, but I guess that would make sense if I had gone on and read the rest of the trilogy. And I want to share a quote from the book. "You are words," the fireflies said. "Your soul is the poem. The struggle to make mortal words say the infinite unsayable is the struggle that defines sentience." And I'm going to talk about the book in regards to Canada Reads. So does this book fit within the theme for this year's debates? Well, the theme this year is a book that brings Canada into focus. I think this book brings up some good issues with Canada, especially with the focus on working class lives. And it deals with a broad range of issues. So not only does it talk about working class lives, but it talks about how a lot of Indigenous people are left in poverty and living paycheck to paycheck, or even less than that. And the dealing with addiction and abuse, and these are all interconnected issues, and I think that's very important to bring up that interconnectivity between all these issues. Do I think this is a book that all Canadians can or should read? And I do think this is a book that all Canadians can read. It is very accessible to every level of reader. I believe it would be classified as a YA, but it doesn't fall into those tropes, so I think adults would like it as well. And I definitely think this is a book that should be taught in schools. And I think it is a book that Canadians should read because of the accessibility. And that accessibility would make it easier for Canadians to learn about the Indigenous rights and poverty and addiction as well. What do I think about the person defending this book? Ganyadillo Horn is a Mohawk actor, and I'm also Mohawk, so that was really cool to learn. And I looked her up, and it was very interesting to see that she played Dorothy in Supernatural. I thought she looked a bit familiar. And she was also in Defiant, and I loved these two shows. So I'm really excited to see her defend this book. So where in the competition do I think this book will place? I honestly think that this book has a good chance to win because it is so readable. An argument against it could be that last quarter, which feels a little jarring, but I think the debates will concentrate more on the issues as opposed to that. And I think the accessibility of this book will be a boon for it in the debates this year. So if you've read this book, let me know what you think about it, and where do you think it will place in Canada Reads this year. Thank you for watching.